The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when I found the certified letter taped to my front door, demanding that I personally shovel not just my own walkway, but the entire block's worth of sidewalks every single morning by 7 a.m. My name is Derek Rollins, and I had lived in the Pinewood Grove development in Naperville, Illinois, for exactly 8 months when this nightmare began. I bought the house after my accident, specifically choosing a single-story ranch because stairs had become my enemy. The doctors had been clear about my limitations after the semi-truck ran a red light and turned my morning commute into 6 surgeries and 14 months of recovery. My spine would never be the same, and while I could walk short distances without assistance, any repetitive physical labor sent shooting pains through my lower back that could leave me bedridden for days. I stood there in my doorway, reading the letter again, my breath forming clouds in the December cold. The letter was signed by Karen Hartwell, president of the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association. I had met her exactly twice before, both times briefly, and she had struck me as the type of person who measured her self-worth by how much control she could exert over others. The letter stated that due to an emergency amendment to the HOA bylaws, passed at a meeting I had never been notified about, all able-bodied residents were now required to maintain the sidewalks adjacent to their properties and extending 50 feet in either direction. The fine for non-compliance was $200 per day. I limped back inside, my leg already aching from just standing in the cold doorway. My chocolate lab, Bruno, looked up from his bed near the fireplace, sensing my agitation. I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled out my laptop, searching through my email for any notice of this supposed emergency meeting. Nothing. I checked my spam folder. Still nothing. My phone rang. It was my neighbor to the left, an elderly man named Herbert Chen who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. "Derek, did you get that insane letter?" Herbert's voice was strained. "Just read it. This cannot be legal. I am 78 years old. I have arthritis in both knees. My cardiologist specifically told me not to shovel snow. This is absolutely ridiculous." When was this meeting supposed to have happened? Last Tuesday, apparently. I received no notice either. I spoke with the Hendersons across the street, and they said the same thing. Karen just decided this on her own, I think. I told Herbert I would look into it and hung up. Then I did what anyone in my situation would do. I started researching. The Americans with Disabilities Act was clear about reasonable accommodations. While HOAs did have significant power, they could not require disabled residents to perform physical labor that would worsen their medical conditions. I had documentation from 3 different doctors stating that repetitive shoveling, lifting, or any sustained physical labor involving my back was medically inadvisable. The next morning, I woke to someone pounding on my door at 6:45 a.m. I struggled out of bed, every movement a reminder of my limitations, and made my way to the front door. Through the window, I could see Karen Hartwell standing on my porch, arms crossed, her expression one of practiced indignation. She was probably in her early 50s, with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and a North Face jacket that still had the tags on it. I opened the door. "Mr. Rollins, I assume you received the notice about snow removal." "Good morning to you too, Karen." "Yes, I received it." "Then why is your sidewalk not cleared? It is now 6:46 a.m. You have 14 minutes before you are in violation." I took a breath, trying to keep my voice level. I am disabled. I physically cannot shovel snow without causing serious damage to my spine. I have medical documentation. Her expression did not change. The bylaws make no exception for personal medical issues, All residents are required to maintain their sidewalks. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires you to make reasonable accommodations. The ADA applies to public accommodations and employers, not private HOAs. She said this with the confidence of someone who had Googled something once and considered herself an expert. That is actually incorrect. HOAs are subject to the Fair Housing Act, which incorporates ADA protections. I cannot physically perform this labor. Then hire someone to do it. The notice says residents must personally perform the labor, not contract it out. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Exactly. Personal responsibility is what makes a community strong. I will see you at the next board meeting where we will discuss your fine. She turned and walked away, her boots crunching on the snow I had not cleared. I closed the door and leaned against it, my back already protesting the mere act of standing in the cold. This was going to be a fight. Over the next week, I received 3 more letters, each threatening escalating fines. The total was now $800. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in disability rights and HOA disputes. Her name was Patricia Morrison, and her office was in downtown Chicago. She agreed to take my case after reviewing my medical records and the HOA's letters. "This is cut and dry," Patricia said during our first meeting. Her office overlooked Michigan Avenue, and snow was falling outside the windows. "They are clearly violating the Fair Housing Act. We will send them a cease and desist letter, and if they continue, we will file a complaint with HUD. What about the fines they are already threatening? Unenforceable. Do not pay them a cent. That would be admitting fault." The cease and desist letter was sent on a Friday. By Monday morning, I had another letter from Karen, this one even more aggressive. She claimed that my refusal to comply was endangering the community, that children could not walk safely to school, and that I was being selfish by hiding behind so-called disabilities. That phrase, so-called disabilities, made my blood boil. I had spent 14 months learning to walk again. I had lost my job as a construction supervisor because I could no longer do the physical inspections required. My entire life had been turned upside down by an accident that was not my fault, and this woman had the audacity to suggest I was faking it. But I kept my cool. I forwarded the letter to Patricia, who immediately filed a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development and sent a strongly worded response to the HOA board. 2 weeks passed. The snow kept falling. Other residents had started shoveling, I noticed, but there was a tension in the neighborhood now. People whispered when they saw me. Some, like Herbert, were supportive and outraged on my behalf. Others seemed to buy into Karen's narrative that I was a freeloader making excuses. Then came the February board meeting. I had every right to attend, and Patricia advised me to be there, to make my presence known and put a human face to the legal documents. The meeting was held in the community center, a building I had only been in once before for a neighborhood cookout the previous summer. I arrived at 7 p.m., right when the meeting was scheduled to start. The room was packed. Karen sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members, all of whom looked uncomfortable. She saw me enter and her expression hardened. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming," Karen began. "We have a lot to discuss tonight, including the ongoing issue of snow removal compliance." I raised my hand. "This is not a forum for public comment yet," Karen said. "When will that be?" "After we complete the board's business." The meeting dragged on. They discussed landscaping contracts, pool maintenance for the upcoming summer, and a proposal to install new streetlights. Finally, after nearly an hour, Karen opened the floor to residents. I stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me. My name is Derek Rollins, and I live at 2847 Pinewood Circle. I want to address the snow removal policy that was implemented without proper notice to residents." "You received notice," Karen interrupted. "I received a letter after the policy was allegedly passed. I received no notice of the meeting where it was voted on. Neither did many other residents I have spoken with." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "The notice was posted on the community website," Karen said, "which I have never received login credentials for, despite requesting them twice since I moved in. That is a personal issue. And furthermore," I continued, my voice rising slightly, "this policy violates federal law. The Fair Housing Act requires HOAs to make reasonable accommodations for disabled residents. I am physically unable to perform repetitive shoveling due to documented spinal injuries. I have provided medical documentation to this board, and instead of working with me, you have threatened me with thousands of dollars in fines and sent me letters questioning the validity of my disabilities." The room was silent now. One of the other board members, a man named George, spoke up. "Karen, is this true? Did he provide medical documentation?" Karen's face flushed. "His personal medical issues do not supersede the needs of the community." "Actually, they do," Patricia said, standing up from where she had been sitting in the back row. "My name is Patricia Morrison, and I am Mr. Rollins's attorney. The Fair Housing Act is explicit on this matter. Your policy, as written and enforced, is illegal. We have already filed a complaint with HUD, and if this harassment continues, we will pursue further legal action including damages for emotional distress and discrimination." Karen stood up, her hands flat on the table. "This is not harassment. This is enforcement of community standards that everyone agreed to when they bought their homes. Show me where in the original CC and Articus it says residents must personally shovel snow beyond their own property," I said. She could not, because it was not there. This was a policy she had invented, passed in a meeting that was not properly noticed, and was now trying to enforce through intimidation. George spoke again. "I think we need to table this discussion and have our HOA attorney review the policy and the complaints that have been raised." "I second that," said another board member, a woman named Linda. Karen looked furious, but she was outvoted. The motion passed 3-2 with Karen and one other member voting against it. After the meeting, several residents approached me to express their support. Herbert shook my hand. A young couple with 2 kids thanked me for speaking up, saying they had been afraid to object. But I also felt the cold stares from others, the ones who saw me as a troublemaker disrupting their orderly little community. The next morning, I found my garbage cans tipped over and trash scattered across my driveway. It could have been animals, but the timing felt deliberate. I cleaned it up as best I could, each bend and stretch reminding me why I could not shovel snow for an entire block. A week later, I received a notice that my trash service was being temporarily suspended due to alleged violation of trash container placement guidelines. I called the waste management company directly, and they had no record of any issue. When I called the HOA office, the property manager, a timid woman named Susan, admitted that Karen had called and requested the suspension. "On what grounds?" I asked. "She said your containers were blocking the sidewalk. They are in my driveway, exactly where they have been since I moved in." Susan sighed. "I know. I am just telling you what she told me. I will reinstate your service." But it was becoming clear that Karen was not going to let this go. She was going to make my life miserable in every petty way she could think of. 2 days after the trash incident, I received a notice that my house color was not in compliance with HOA standards and needed to be repainted within 30 days. My house was beige. It had been beige when I bought it. Every third house in the neighborhood was the exact same shade of beige. I took photos and sent them to Patricia, who was building quite a file at this point. "This is classic retaliation," she said when I called her. "Document everything. Every letter, every interaction, every incident. This strengthens our case significantly." Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in late February. I had just gotten home from physical therapy, which I still attended twice a week. My back was sore but manageable. I let Bruno out into the backyard and was making coffee when I heard shouting outside. I looked out my front window and saw Karen standing on the sidewalk in front of my house with a man I did not recognize. He was holding a shovel. She was pointing at my walkway, which had a light dusting of snow from the previous evening, and gesturing animatedly. I opened my front door. "Can I help you?" Karen turned to me. "Since you refuse to maintain this sidewalk, I have hired someone to do it, and you will be billed for the service." "I did not hire anyone, and I am not paying for this." The bylaws state that if a resident fails to maintain their property, the HOA can have the work done and bill the resident. My property is maintained. There is barely an inch of snow, and it is still actively falling. The man with the shovel looked uncomfortable. "Look, lady, I do not want to be in the middle of this." "Then leave," I said to him. "I am not authorizing any work, and I am not paying for it." He looked at Karen, shrugged, and walked back to his truck. Karen's face went red. "You cannot just refuse services that are required." "I absolutely can, and I am. Leave my property." "The sidewalk is not your property. It is community property." "The sidewalk is public property maintained by the city. You have no authority here." This was something Patricia had researched. The sidewalks in Naperville were indeed city property, which meant the HOA had even less standing to enforce their shoveling policy than I had originally thought. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and then turned and marched away, pulling her phone from her pocket as she went. 20 minutes later, a Naperville police car pulled up in front of my house. I went outside again, this time with my phone recording in my pocket. I had learned to document everything. The officer who approached was young, probably in his late 20s. His nameplate read Officer Brennan. "Good morning, sir. I received a call about a dispute over snow removal." "There is no dispute from my end," I said calmly. "I am disabled and cannot physically shovel snow. The HOA president is harassing me about it, despite being informed that she is violating the Fair Housing Act." "Can I see some identification?" I provided my license. He ran it, found nothing, and then asked me to explain the situation. I gave him a brief overview, mentioned my attorney, and showed him the medical documentation I now kept on my phone for exactly these situations. "So you have not threatened anyone or damaged any property?" "Absolutely not. I have been the one receiving threatening letters and having my services canceled in retaliation for asserting my legal rights." Officer Brennan nodded slowly. "Okay, I am going to go speak with the other party. This sounds like a civil issue, not a criminal one." He walked over to where Karen was standing by her car, watching. They spoke for several minutes. I could not hear what was said, but I saw her becoming increasingly animated. Finally, he handed her what looked like a business card and walked back to me. "Sir, I have advised her that this is a civil matter and she needs to work through proper legal channels. If she continues to harass you, you can file for a restraining order. Also, filing false police reports is a crime, so I have warned her about that as well." "Thank you, officer." He left and Karen drove away without looking at me. That evening, Herbert called me. "Derek, I think you should know. Karen has been going door to door trying to get people to sign a petition to force you to move out." "On what grounds?" She is saying you are creating a hostile environment and not contributing to the community. It is nonsense, but she has always been good at getting people worked up. How many people have signed? I do not know. I sent her packing when she showed up here, but the Martinsons down the street are friendly with her, and I saw her at their place for a while. This was escalating beyond what I had anticipated. I called Patricia and left a message about the petition. She called back within an hour. She cannot force you to move out based on a petition. She would need grounds for eviction under the HOA rules, and being disabled is not grounds. If anything, this petition could be evidence of a hostile housing environment, which is another violation of the Fair Housing Act. This is getting ridiculous, I know, but we are building an incredibly strong case. HUD is already investigating based on our initial complaint. This additional evidence of retaliation and harassment only helps us. March came, and with it, the beginning of the snow melt. I thought perhaps the worst was over. I was wrong. On March 10th, I received a notice that I was being fined $15,000 for various violations accumulated over the past 3 months. The list was absurd: snow removal non-compliance, trash container violations, house color non-compliance, lawn maintenance issues from the previous fall, and something called creating community discord. I did not panic. I immediately forwarded it to Patricia. "They are getting desperate," she said. "HUD must be putting pressure on them. This is so egregious that it actually helps us. No judge would uphold these fines. Can they put a lien on my house? They can try, but we will fight it. And when we win, they will be liable for our legal fees and potentially damages." The next HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. Patricia advised me to attend again and to stay calm no matter what Karen said or did. Those 2 weeks were tense. I started noticing cars driving slowly past my house at odd hours. Nothing overtly threatening, but enough to make me uneasy. I installed a doorbell camera and 2 additional security cameras covering my driveway and backyard. The cameras proved their worth almost immediately. 3 days before the HOA meeting, at 2 a.m., someone threw eggs at my front door and spray-painted freeloader on my driveway. The cameras caught everything. The person was wearing dark clothes and a mask, but the build and gait looked distinctly like Tom Martinson, Karen's friend from down the street. I called the police and filed a report. Officer Brennan came out again, reviewed the footage, and agreed that there were grounds for charges of vandalism and possible trespassing. "You want to press charges?" "Absolutely." He said they would investigate and be in touch. I also sent the footage to Patricia. The day of the HOA meeting, I felt like I was preparing for battle. Patricia came with me, as did Herbert and a few other supportive neighbors. The community center was even more packed than last time. Word had spread that something big was happening. Karen called the meeting to order, and this time there were 2 men in suits sitting at the table with the board. One introduced himself as Richard Kelso, the HOA's attorney. The other was from their insurance company. "Before we begin," Richard said, "I want to address the ongoing situation with Mr. Rollins and the snow removal policy. After reviewing the matter extensively, it is the recommendation of this legal counsel that the emergency snow removal policy be rescinded, and that the board issue an apology to Mr. Rollins and any other affected residents." Karen looked like she had been slapped. "That is not what we discussed. Mrs. Hartwell, the HOA is facing a federal investigation and potential lawsuits that could cost tens of thousands of dollars, possibly more. The policy was implemented improperly, without proper notice, and it violates federal fair housing law. There is no legal defense." He is making excuses, Karen said, her voice rising. He is perfectly capable of shoveling snow, he just does not want to. I have seen him walking around playing with his dog. Mrs. Hartwell, Patricia stood up. My client has provided extensive medical documentation of his disabilities. Your continued insistence that he is fabricating his injuries is not only offensive, it is defamatory. And your pattern of harassment, retaliation, and discrimination has been thoroughly documented. We will be pursuing a civil suit against you personally, in addition to the HOA, for the emotional distress and damages you have caused. You cannot sue me for doing my job as HOA president. You can be sued for discrimination, harassment, and violating federal civil rights laws, which is exactly what you have done. George, the board member who had been sympathetic before, spoke up. I move that we rescind the snow removal policy effective immediately, issue a formal apology to Mr. Rollins and other affected residents, and accept Karen Hartwell's resignation as board president. I am not resigning, Karen said. Then I move that we remove you for cause, George said. Your actions have exposed this HOA to legal liability and created a hostile environment in our community. I second the motion, Linda said. The vote was 4-1. Karen voted against her own removal, but it did not matter. She was out. She stood up, gathering her papers with shaking hands. You are all making a mistake. This community will fall apart without proper leadership. No, Karen, Herbert said from the audience. This community will heal now that you are gone. She stormed out and the room erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs. The rest of the meeting was productive. The new interim president, George, immediately moved to rescind all the fines that had been levied against me. The snow removal policy was officially eliminated, and the board voted to implement a new process requiring proper notice and resident input before any major policy changes. After the meeting, several people apologized to me. Some had signed Karen's petition and now regretted it. Others admitted they had been afraid to speak up. I accepted their apologies, though the wounds were still fresh. A week later, the police informed me that they had enough evidence to charge Tom Martinson with criminal mischief for the vandalism. He took a plea deal that included probation and restitution for the cleanup costs. The HUD investigation concluded in April. The Pinewood Grove HOA was found to have violated the Fair Housing Act through their discriminatory snow removal policy, and the subsequent harassment and retaliation against me. They were fined and required to implement fair housing training for all board members and conduct a review of all policies to ensure ADA compliance. Patricia and I also moved forward with the civil suit against Karen personally. She fought it initially, insisting she had done nothing wrong, but as the evidence mounted, her attorney advised her to settle. In June, we reached a settlement that included a substantial monetary award and a written apology. The apology arrived on a Tuesday. It was brief and clearly written by her attorney, but seeing her name on a document that admitted wrongdoing and apologized for the discrimination and harassment brought a sense of closure I had not realized I needed. Karen and her husband moved out of Pinewood Grove in July. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that they relocated to a condo in downtown Chicago where there were no HOA politics to navigate. I hoped, for everyone's sake, that she learned something from the experience, though I doubted it. My life slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was reasonable and responsive. They established a hardship policy for residents who could not perform certain physical tasks, connecting them with volunteer helpers or affordable services. It was the kind of community-building approach that should have been implemented from the start. Herbert and I became close friends. We had both lived through the same ordeal and come out the other side. We started a weekly tradition of coffee on Saturday mornings, sitting on my porch when the weather was nice, talking about everything and nothing. My back never fully healed. It never would. I still had bad days where getting out of bed was a monumental effort. But I had also learned to advocate for myself, to know my rights, and to not back down when someone tried to discriminate against me because of my disabilities. The following winter, when the snow came again, I hired a local teenager to shovel my walkway. It was my choice, done on my timeline, and nobody gave me grief about it. The kid was saving for college, and I was happy to help him out while also keeping my property clear. One Saturday morning in December, almost exactly a year after the first threatening letter had appeared on my door, I sat on my porch with Herbert, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. The street was peaceful. Kids were building a snowman in the park across the way. Someone was shoveling their driveway, but it was their choice, not a mandate. "You know," Herbert said, "I have lived here for 20 years, and this is the best the neighborhood has felt in a long time. Because Karen is gone. Because someone finally stood up to her. She had run roughshod over people for years, and everyone was too afraid to push back. You did not just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us." I had not thought about it that way, but he was right. The policy Karen tried to enforce would have hurt a lot of people. The elderly, the disabled, single parents working multiple jobs who did not have time to shovel 3 times a day. By fighting back, I had protected all of them. Bruno wandered out onto the porch and settled at my feet with a contented sigh. I scratched behind his ears and watched the neighborhood kids play. My phone buzzed. It was Patricia, sending me the final paperwork showing that the settlement funds had been transferred and the case was officially closed. I texted back a thank you, then put my phone away. "Everything good?" Herbert asked. "Everything is good," I said, and for the first time in a long time I really meant it. The legal battle had been exhausting both emotionally and physically. There were days during those months when I wondered if it was worth the fight, if I should just pay someone to shovel and move on with my life. But that would have meant accepting discrimination, accepting that my disabilities made me less entitled to reasonable accommodations, accepting that someone like Karen could bully people into submission just because she held a title. I thought about all the other disabled people who might face similar situations, who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back. If my case helped establish a precedent, if it made even one HOA think twice before implementing discriminatory policies, then every letter, every sleepless night, every moment of stress had been worth it. Spring came, and with it, new growth. The neighborhood organized a community cleanup day, and I participated as much as I could, picking up litter in the park while being mindful of my limitations. People no longer stared or whispered. I was just Derek, the guy at 2847 Pinewood Circle with the friendly chocolate lab. The new HOA board asked if I would be interested in joining a committee to review and update the community rules. I agreed, figuring I had earned some expertise in what not to do. We met monthly, going through decades of accumulated regulations, eliminating the ones that were outdated or overreaching, clarifying the ones that made sense, and ensuring everything was in compliance with federal and state laws. It was tedious work, but it was also healing. I was transforming from a victim of HOA overreach into an active participant in creating a better community. That shift in perspective changed everything. In August, the neighborhood threw a summer barbecue at the community center. It was the first big social event since the whole snow removal debacle, and there was an unspoken agreement that it would be a fresh start for everyone. I brought potato salad and spent the afternoon talking with neighbors I had barely known before all this started. Some apologized again for not supporting me sooner. Others thanked me for what I had done. A few just wanted to talk about normal things. Work, kids, the Cubs season, anything but HOA drama. As the sun set and the kids ran around playing tag, George approached me with a beer in hand. "Derek, I want to thank you again. I have been on this board for 5 years and I watched Karen become more and more controlling. I should have said something sooner, but I was conflict averse. You showing up and fighting back gave the rest of us the courage to finally do the right thing." "I appreciate that," I said. "But honestly, I was just trying to avoid being fined into bankruptcy for something I physically could not do." He laughed. "Well, your self-preservation instinct saved this whole neighborhood from turning into some kind of authoritarian nightmare." We clinked our bottles together, and I felt a sense of belonging I had not experienced since moving to Pinewood Grove. This was what a community should feel like. People looking out for each other, working together, respecting each other's differences and limitations. The fall brought cooler weather and the leaves changing colors. Bruno and I took daily walks around the neighborhood, never going too far because of my back, but enjoying the fresh air and the changing seasons. People waved as we passed. Some stopped to chat. The neighborhood had become genuinely friendly. In October, I received a call from a man named James who lived in a different subdivision in Naperville. He had heard about my case and was facing a similar situation with his own HOA. They were requiring all residents to personally trim their trees to specific heights, and he had a heart condition that prevented him from climbing ladders or doing overhead work. I spent an hour on the phone with him, explaining what I had learned, recommending Patricia as an attorney and encouraging him not to back down. He thanked me profusely and said just knowing someone else had been through it, and one gave him hope. That call made me realize that these situations were probably happening all over the country. HOAs wielding power without proper understanding of disability rights laws. Disabled people being bullied and discriminated against because board members thought rules applied equally to everyone, regardless of physical limitations. I started thinking about how to raise awareness. I wrote a detailed post about my experience on a community forum, changing some names for privacy, but laying out the facts of what happened and the laws that protected me. The post went viral locally, and I started receiving messages from other people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were as bad as mine. Others were worse. One woman had been fined for not mowing her lawn after she broke her leg in 3 places. A veteran with PTSD was being harassed for having an emotional support dog that was supposedly against breed restrictions. An elderly couple was threatened with foreclosure because they could not repaint their house fast enough after the husband had a stroke. Each story made me angrier at the system that allowed this to happen, and more determined to help however I could. I connected people with attorneys, shared resources about fair housing laws, and created a document outlining residents' rights when dealing with HOAs. By November, I had inadvertently become a local advocate for disability rights in HOA disputes. A reporter from the Naperville Sun interviewed me for an article about HOA overreach. The article ran in mid-November and included interviews with several legal experts who confirmed that many HOAs either did not know about or chose to ignore fair housing requirements. The article prompted the City Council to announce they would be reviewing HOA regulations and considering new ordinances to protect residents from discriminatory practices. It was not a complete solution, but it was progress. December arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of when this all started. The snow returned, but this time there were no threatening letters, no demands, no harassment. I had my teenage helper on speed dial, and he cleared my walkway whenever needed. The arrangement worked perfectly for both of us. On Christmas Eve, Herbert invited me over for dinner. His daughter and grandchildren were visiting from Wisconsin, and he insisted I should not spend the holiday alone. I brought a pie and spent a wonderful evening with his family, feeling more connected to my community than I had in years. As I drove home that night, Bruno dozing in the passenger seat, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The fear and stress when those first letters arrived, the anger at being discriminated against, the determination to fight back, the validation when the legal system confirmed I was right, the satisfaction of seeing Karen removed and the policies changed. And finally, the peace of living in a neighborhood that had learned from its mistakes. My phone rang. It was Patricia calling to wish me Merry Christmas. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Really good, actually. Better than I have been in a long time. I am glad. You know, your case has become one of my go-to examples when I teach seminars on fair housing law. It is a perfect illustration of HOA overreach and disability discrimination. Happy to be a teaching tool, I guess," she laughed. "Seriously, though, you handled everything with grace and determination. A lot of people would have given up or given in. You stuck to your principles and made things better not just for yourself, but for everyone in your community." After we hung up, I sat in my driveway for a few minutes, engine off, looking at my house. It was just a simple ranch in a subdivision in Naperville, Illinois. Nothing fancy or remarkable. But it was mine, and I had fought to make it a place where I could live without fear of discrimination or harassment. The porch light glowed warm against the snow. Inside, the Christmas tree I had put up was visible through the front window. Bruno whined softly, ready to go in and settle by the fireplace. I got out of the car, my back stiff from sitting but manageable, and walked up my cleared sidewalk to my front door. As I put my key in the lock, I noticed an envelope tucked into the door frame. For a split second, my heart raced, thinking it might be another threatening letter. But when I opened it, I found a Christmas card from the current HOA board, signed by all 5 members, thanking me for my service on the Rules Committee and wishing me happy holidays. I smiled, truly smiled, and went inside to the warmth of my home. Bruno settled in his usual spot, and I sat in my recliner, the one piece of furniture I had splurged on after the settlement because it supported my back perfectly. The year had been a battle, but I had won more than just a legal case. I had won the right to live in my home without fear, the respect of my neighbors, and the satisfaction of knowing I had made a difference. The Americans with Disabilities Act had protected me when Karen Hartwell tried to force me into physical labor my body could not handle. And in standing up for my rights, I had helped ensure others would be protected too. As I drifted off to sleep that night, exhausted but content, I felt a sense of closure. The nightmare that started with that certified letter demanding I plow sidewalks daily had ended with justice, change, and a community that was better for having gone through the struggle. The snow would keep falling every winter, as it always did in Illinois. But I would never again face discrimination for being unable to shovel it myself. That battle was over, and I had won.